On today's episode of the show, we're explaining why the Louisville Cardinals will defeat the Stanford Cardinal on Saturday.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the university, third year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Now, guys, today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Louisville back in action following the bye week, 3:30 Eastern kickoff against the Stanford Cardinal on the West Coast. This is a game that Louisville is favored heavily to win. I think Louisville does win this game against Stanford, but we will dive into the keys to victory. With Miami losing the first game of the season, Pittsburgh losing again this week, it has many wondering, can the Cardinals still make the ACC Championship game? Possible, but not probable. We'll explain. And then to conclude the show, we will dive into a weekly mailbag segment. So, a lot of good football talk on the show today. Louisville back in action following the bye week. 3:30 kickoff on the West Coast. It's 3:30 Eastern time, 12:30 Pacific time against Stanford in Palo Alto. The Cardinals couldn't have had any different of a campaign in terms of record. Louisville 6-3. They're 4-2 in conference play. Compare that to Stanford 2-7, 1-5 in conference play. They have lost their last 6 games. And outside of one against Wake Forest, all of those performances resulted in blowout losses for Troy Taylor's team. You felt like, maybe coming into this season after beating Cal Poly and Syracuse, that, Taylor's team in his second year at Stanford would be able to take that next step forward. But so far, that really hasn't been the case. According to FanDuel, one of the title sponsors of the show, Louisville has been hovering around that 19.5, 20-point favorite mark pretty much all week. Now, if you listen to the previous shows, this show was pre-recorded before the week started. I actually am out of town on a work trip, so the Monday, Wednesday, and now Thursday episodes of the show have been pre-recorded. So if something changes, please forgive me, but we will be back in action on Friday. But nonetheless, I'm not really surprising anyone by predicting that Louisville is going to win this game. I did mention yesterday that despite Louisville being a heavy favorite, that, a road game in conference play following a bye week and a big-time win, you really just can't afford to overlook or underestimate an opponent, because we've seen, time and time again, and we're probably not done seeing a heavy underdog end up not only competing in a game, but ultimately ended up winning. So, if Louisville handles business and plays, up to or doesn't play down to the level of competition, I do think that they win this game, and they probably blow Stanford out. But let's look at the 3 keys to victory in this game. I feel like one thing that Louisville has an advantage over Stanford, one of the main advantages, is the offensive explosiveness. Stanford has a tough time scoring points. They have only scored over 30 once this season, and that came, once this season, that came in the win against Cal Poly. They have not scored over 30 points in any other game. Louisville, on the other hand, is a team that likes to put up points, and I feel like if you, extend the streak of not shooting yourself in the foot in the first quarter, and you build the lead and you score in that first quarter, and, you start to put some points up on the board, I don't know that Stanford is going to be able to make a comeback, and they're going to be able to string drives together and be able to score, and they're going to be able to get stops. So if you now granted, you look at the Clemson game, and Louisville didn't really play bad in that first quarter. Now were losing at the end of the first quarter, but they didn't play bad. Like, Louisville hasn't really had like a, oh wow, they came ready to play right off the bat. Like if Louisville can, I'm just saying not have a disastrous first quarter. Like it doesn't have to be great. Like you don't have to score 21 in the first quarter, but if you don't turn the ball over, if you are able to put some points up, if you don't give up big plays for the Stanford offense, like essentially if you don't, have multiple disasters in the first quarter, I think that's sort of what I'm aiming for here. Just have an average first quarter. And I think you put yourself into a good spot because Stanford, if you score early on and put that team in a deficit to where they have to come back, because this is an offense that doesn't throw the ball well anyway. Like they're, coming into the week, they were coming into last week, sorry, they were 119th in total passing offense, which was the worst in the ACC. And I mean, they're not even that great of a running offense either. They're just inside of the top 100. So offensively, it's a revolving door at quarterback. If you're able to put some points up, if you have a good first quarter, I think that's sort of the first key to victory here. The second one is to limit the quarterback running the football. And I know it feels like, I feel like a broken clock here, right? And I keep repeating myself, but it's been an issue now. Louisville did a better job than they have probably all season against Cade Klubnik. But at the end of the day, you have to continually show that you can step up to the plate. And this situation is that Stanford really doesn't throw the ball all that well. And one issue is you have to wonder, well, who is going to start for the Cardinal in this game? Is it going to be probably the presumed starter, Ashton Daniels, the junior from Georgia? Is it going to be Justin Lamson, who got some run in their last game? Or is it going to be Elijah Brown? I don't know. But I'm going to say probably Ashton Daniels does get the nod with no inside information. Hopefully we hear something before this episode comes out. But Ashton Daniels has not had a great year throwing the football. Like he has 2 more interceptions than he does touchdowns, 6 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. There's only been one game I mentioned yesterday. There's only been one game this season where he's had more touchdowns than interceptions. That came against Cal Poly. And when he's played, a Power 4 team, he just really hasn't been all that good. He's gotten over 200 passing yards twice this season. And more often than not, he's throwing multiple interceptions. So what has he done to combat this? Well, he's ran the football. He is Stanford's leading rusher with 480 yards on the season, 5.5 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns. His last game out against NC State was by far his best rushing performance of the season, 11 for 129 and 2 touchdowns. So I think for Stanford to have a legitimate chance in this game, they have to make things messy. They have to cause chaos and pandemonium. And one way you do that, I feel like, is, having a running quarterback that's able to extend drives with his legs. And if Louisville doesn't have an answer for him, well, then, you have an offense that if you give them the ball inside of Louisville territory, they might score. They might, like, you're going to think about Stanford like, oh, there's no way Louisville loses this game. Well, we've seen teams being 20-point favorites either struggle and or lose games like this. It's on the road. You're coming off of an emotional high win against Clemson. It's after the bye week. So, and Stanford's playing with nothing to lose. So you have to show that you can be the Louisville team we saw against Clemson to be able to come in and defend the run for the opposing quarterback. The third thing, I feel like this is sort of a prerequisite here, but anytime you're playing against a potential, upset bid like Stanford's going to try to pull off, one of the ways that you can, accelerate that possibility is by losing the turnover battle, giving the ball away, especially in your territory. Louisville hasn't been the greatest at forcing turnovers this year, but Stanford has been one of the worst teams in turnover margin. They have a -5 turnover margin. That's 103rd in the country. It's second worst in the ACC, just trailing Florida State, who's -14. My goodness. Stanford is the next closest team with -5. So I think if you hold on to the football, usually Louisville's not really a team that turns the ball over much, but they don't really force a lot of turnovers either. I think that they need to really focus in and get after the quarterback and either force fumbles or force Daniels to throw into some tough windows, and Louisville's able to intercept some passes. I mean, Louisville's had the opportunities this year. They've dropped more interceptions that we probably like to acknowledge, but it is the reality of the situation. So something to focus on is, can Louisville, can they not have a disastrous first quarter? Can they limit what Ashton Daniels can do on the ground? And can they win the turnover battle? And if they do those three things, I think you're looking at a huge margin of victory for the Louisville Cardinals. But when Miami lost this past weekend, I had people asking me, I saw people tweet this on Twitter, inquiring about the Cardinals' chances to make the ACC Championship game. And here's what I will tell you. It's possible, but it's not probable. A lot has to go Louisville's way, and the probability just isn't all that high. We'll break down the scenarios when we come back on today's episode of Locked On Louisville. Cardinal fans, today's episode of the show is also brought to you by FanDuel. We mentioned the spread that Louisville is going to likely be favored at in this game. You can check out all the player props on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets. If you win, the app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same app where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Cardinal fans, thanks again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. When Louisville beat Clemson, I know that a lot of fans were sort of really, not upset, but they're like, dang, man, if only we could have beaten one of Miami or SMU, specifically SMU, we'd be right in the thick of the ACC Championship game hunt. It's been an outside looking in situation since you lost that game against Miami. When Miami lost, people were sitting there like, well, hold on now. Do the Cardinals, do they have a chance now? Do they have a chance to get to the championship game? Because they're currently sitting in sole possession of, I guess you would say, fourth place. I mean, they're one of two teams with 2 losses in conference play. It's Louisville and Pittsburgh. Ahead of them, you have Clemson and Miami at 6-1 and 5-1, respectively, and SMU is an undefeated 5-0. So the discussion has been, well, can Louisville get back to the ACC Championship game? Like, is it possible? In the name of technicality, it is possible. In the name of probability, it's pretty unlikely. And I want to discuss, sort of the roadmap of how to get there. If you're one of those fans that wants to, kind of keep track of that, and I imagine a lot of fans would. I do want to just go ahead and get this out of the way right now, as I don't want to get your hopes up. We have to talk about this because it's being brought up more and more, but I don't want to get your hopes up, because what Louisville needs is they need a lot to go their way. And there's a couple of scenarios that need to happen. Shout out to Kelly Dickey on Twitter. If you're not following him, go ahead and do so for all of your Louisville statistics, historical statistics, and much more at Real Card Game on Twitter. I'm going to break down his tweet that he sent on Sunday morning that really sort of paints the picture of what you need to look at. So for starters, in this hypothetical, Louisville must beat Stanford and Pittsburgh. Like, you can't have 3 losses. I think that that's a given. You understand that to be the case, right? Like, obviously, if Louisville wants to, get an opportunity to get back to Charlotte, you need to get back, or you need to beat Stanford and Pittsburgh. That would put you at 6-2 in conference play. So if you do that, you've sort of checked off the first box. But the next one, like these next 2 things, like, the only way that Louisville gets in is by getting into a situation to where there are 3 teams with 6-2 conference records, and at that point, you would be able to advance to play SMU by having the highest collective winning percentage among its ACC opponents. Like, that is one good thing about playing both Clemson and Miami, is that both Clemson and Miami haven't played each other. And neither of them have played SMU. Louisville has. Louisville's played, and then we'll have played Pittsburgh as well. Like, Louisville has played the top teams in the standings in the ACC. So by that notion, Louisville would then, like, you think, well, Louisville doesn't have them head-to-head over Miami. Sure. But the 3-team tie, it's not about head-to-head. At least not in this situation, because it's about the virtue of its ACC opponents having the highest collective winning percentage, and Louisville would be getting to go through on that. But how do you get to that 3-team tie? That's the main question. Well, you would have to have Clemson and Miami get there, because beating Pittsburgh would give them that third conference loss, so they're out of the picture for now. Clemson is 6-1 in conference play. They have one conference game left at Pittsburgh next week. I know people were hoping that they would lose to Virginia Tech. They did not. They are at Pittsburgh this upcoming week on Saturday. Noon kickoff up in the Steel City. Like, this is a game that if you're a Louisville fan, you need to be cheering for Pittsburgh. Like, because if you don't, if Pittsburgh doesn't win, then you're not going to get to the ACC Championship game. Unless, I mean, maybe if SMU were to lose their, like, 2 of their last 3 conference games, they have Boston College, at Virginia, and versus California. Like, if they were to lose 2 of those 3, or maybe all 3, maybe then you're having a different conversation. But the most likely hypothetical is the one that we are discussing right now, and that is Clemson losing to Pittsburgh. Like, that is the first objective. And if Clemson doesn't, then the path gets to the point to where it's not going to happen unless SMU loses, and has a disaster. The next thing that would have to happen is that Miami would also have to lose. And you look at Miami, they're 5-1 in conference play. They just lost their first conference game, first game of the season against Georgia Tech. They have Wake Forest, who is not good, and they're playing them at home. And then you have at Syracuse. And Syracuse has been also it's been a rough. I mean, like, they've exceeded expectations. Like, they're 6-3, but they've lost 2 out of their last 3. They lost at Boston College. They lost at Pittsburgh. Like, look, I know that they beat NC State and UNLV and Georgia Tech, but still, Syracuse hasn't been all that great. Now, to play the devil's advocate, Miami has not had the convincing wins. Like, they've won, but they beat Virginia Tech by 4. They beat Cal by 1. They beat Louisville by 7. The list goes on. So I guess it's not impossible. But again, we're not talking about, whether it can happen or not, because if you're one of those people who's like, well, it can still happen. Of course it can still happen. But just because it can still happen doesn't mean it will or even might still happen. Like, Louisville needs help. That's the whole mantra of this segment, is that Louisville needs help. Like, you would need for Miami to lose to either Wake Forest or Syracuse to get to 6-2. Like, bottom line, if you have been able to keep up or not be able to keep up, I know that I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you all right now, is that Louisville has to get into a 3-way tie for second place. That's what it comes down to. And you need Clemson to lose to Pittsburgh, which is their last ACC game. You need Miami to lose to either Wake Forest or Syracuse to get there to 6-2. And prerequisite, none of that matters unless Louisville wins both of their last conference games at Stanford and at home against Pittsburgh on Senior Day. So if all 3 teams get to 6-2 in conference play, reminder, Louisville wins this tiebreaker because of the teams. Like, the statistic is the ACC opponents that a team plays having the highest collective winning percentage. And Louisville will have played SMU, Clemson, Miami, Pittsburgh, It's pretty straightforward. I know that some are like, well, why is that the case? That I don't know. I mean, like common opponents is something that is a thing amongst tiebreakers, and I don't hate it, especially when you have like a three-way tie. But at the end of the day, you also have to have something that makes sense. So a lot needs to happen for the Louisville Cardinals to get to the ACC Championship game. Personally, this is how I'm operating. I'm operating like it's not a possibility because I don't really want to get my hopes up. Like, look, if Clemson loses to Pittsburgh and then you beat Pittsburgh, yeah, all of the focus goes to Syracuse or Miami at Syracuse because then you're in a real spot. But again, you need some really challenging things to happen. So I'm just operating under let's just win the game in front of us. Let's control what we can control. Let's, win the rest of the regular season and get to 9-3 and go into the offseason with some momentum. That's the way that I'm looking at this. So when we come back after break, we're going to answer some key questions, some key basketball questions. I've been asked whether or not I want to change my 21-10 prediction from before the season, and I'll answer that when we come back. Card Nation, speaking of basketball, I used Game Time to get tickets to both of the Morehead State and Tennessee games, and I will be using them to get tickets. I've already got the Bellarmine tickets, but the Winthrop tickets as well. When I downloaded the Game Time app, it was simple to me. Like, I'm not going to be using any other service. Like when you have the all-in pricing feature that you can toggle on, which removes surprise fees at checkout, or you have the panoramic views from your seat, or what about the most, covered ticket coverage in the industry? That's just only scratching the surface of the benefits that you can look into. Do yourself a favor. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Into the weekly mailbag, a lot of great questions that you all have introduced. If you would like to ask a mailbag question for next week, be sure to drop it in the YouTube comments below, or you can send it to my Twitter, which is in the virtual recording room. If you're listening to this, it is at @dpence_. So a lot of great questions. First question, asking about my men's basketball prediction. You predicted Louisville is going to 21-10 and winning a tournament game this year with the 22-point loss to Tennessee. Are your expectations altered? Not yet. Like I said earlier in the week, it's too early. I know it's not ideal. Like, things have to happen. We have a pretty clear look at what needs to improve and get better as we go out throughout the non-conference schedule. But I'm not ready to jump from that yet. I did expect Louisville to lose a good amount of games in the non-conference schedule. So again, if we're sitting here literally on a month ago, next month, this day next month, if Louisville is then having some key problems, then yeah, I mean we can look at things then. But right now, I'm not going to change anything at the current moment. Do you like that Louisville has a 10-day off period between the games against Bellarmine? Because for me, I want to get the bad taste out of my mouth by getting another win. Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at this. I agree. Part of me wishes that Louisville played tomorrow, and was able to, get back on track with a win against Bellarmine. But another part of me is like, okay, 10 days in between games, it might not be fun for the fan, but it's clear that this team needs to work on stuff. So here, you've got 10 days to sort of assess what went wrong, learn how to correct it, get better in practice, get more reps, against each other, and do whatever you can to just get better each and every day. And I think that, it doesn't help the fans because you're sitting here like, well, damn, I have to, wait 10 days with that bad taste in my mouth, like you said. but for the team, it might be sort of a blessing in disguise. So let's see. Next question. Terrence Edwards disappointed in the game against Tennessee, didn't shoot the ball well. Did we go after a player who isn't Louisville level? I guess the question here is Terrence Edwards a Louisville level player? Of course he is. Of course he's a Sun Belt Player of the Year. Look, I think a lot of what we saw from him against Tennessee, I felt like a lot of that was like just a lack of confidence. Like the shot didn't look all that confident. He looked indecisive. And I think some of that might be a lack of comfort in this offense. It is still early. It was the second game of the year. He's playing with brand new players. Like there is a level of, just a lack of knowing the players around you. Like, yeah, you have a personal connection with them now, but you haven't played a lot on the court against external competition. So I'm not even really going to entertain the other side. I think Terrence Edwards is definitely a Louisville level player. Like he didn't play well against Tennessee, but honestly, nobody did. So, I mean, I'm not really looking at this thinking, is Terrence Edwards good? I'm thinking, how can we get, how can we get Terrence Edwards going? What do we need to do to sort of unlock, that potential? Because he's really good. Terrence is a really good player. It's just a matter of, getting him in comfortable spots. And I think that one thing Pat Kelsey's going to do moving forward is get situations where you get the ball to Terrence as he's slashing to the basket. And I think that that's where he's really dangerous for opposing defenses, is when he is attacking the basket. So what was the most – hold on. Let's see. I actually X out of that question. Let me undo the X out. What was the most demoralizing statistic for you in that game against Tennessee? That's a good question. When you look at this, personally for me, and it's not even something I brought up in the recap episode, but the fact that Rain Smith led your team in rebounds. And don't get me wrong, this is no disrespect to Rain Smith. Rain Smith is a really good player. I enjoy watching him play basketball. But Rain Smith is 6'2". And in none of his college seasons has he averaged over 3 rebounds per game. Now, you had a couple players with 4. James Scott had 4. Sean Hadley had 4. Chucky Hepburn had 4. But when your 6'2" shooting guard is leading your team in rebounds, in a game where you got out-rebounded 40-26, Tennessee had 1 less offensive rebound than Louisville did defensive rebounds. That's the issue. Like, that's what I look at. And of all the things that disappointed me on Saturday, I look at that and I'm like, it was hard to wrap my head around. Rain Smith led the team in rebounds. With all the size and good rebounders that Louisville has on this team, Rain Smith led the team in rebounds. Again, shout out to Rain. No disrespect to him whatsoever, but Louisville has to be better in the front court at gathering rebounds. So that is going to wrap up the mailbag segment on this Thursday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.